Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our Amplify office hours, where we connect you with some of our most awesome designers to answer your questions about prototyping, specifically around the Refugee Education Challenge, where we encounter some interesting limitations and questions. So I want to get started by introducing our wonderful guests. We have Louisa, and I'm going to let her just kind of tell you in a few seconds, a little bit about her.
Hi, I'm Luisa Bavaria. I work with the OpenIDEO team as an impact strategist, and I've also been working with Amplify, doing design research and working in a few projects.
Awesome. And hoping that I pronounced this right, we have George. Jorg, nice. Thank you for joining us. Jorg is tuning in from Palo Alto, our other office here in California, and I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about himself.
So the correct pronunciation is actually Jörg, but good try. It's written like Jorge almost. I am a product designer and engineer based in IDEO Palo Alto. I spent a year with IDEO.org a few years ago, and I am I've been at IDEO for 10 years, mostly focused on products, but a little bit services and experience.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us for this chat. I wanted to get started by just defining prototyping. What is it? Why is it important? And how does it play a role in what we do here on the Amplify program and out when designing and developing ideas? Do you want to give it a stab, Louisa?
So in the Amplify program, we encourage all participants to start prototyping right away. And at IDEO overall, we encourage people to get ideas in front of users as soon as they can. And prototyping just means getting a proof of concept in front of a user to get feedback. And there are different stages, so you can start with something very rough if you have cardboard or paper at hand and you're building a product, or you can do role play if you're doing a service. And as soon as you get feedback from users, then you take that feedback, incorporate it, and go for a second round of prototyping. But it's a very iterative process, so doing it again and again, learning from users, incorporating feedback, and getting back at it.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about your experience, Jorg, in the field with prototyping. How has it been an important part of your process?
Prototyping is a great tool because you can, there's no, you go from brainstorming straight into prototyping and then test it with users, and it's a great tool to really try ideas out. There's not much talking about, oh, will they like it or not? Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? You can just try it out, really, and that's what prototyping is about. So, do you want to make a specific example? I'm trying to think of an example.
Well, I think you bring up a great point that prototyping is something that you can do very early on to start to test your assumptions and answer questions that you might have and refine your idea. So do you have an example of a time that you guys didn't quite have it all worked out and through a quick prototype you answered some of your own questions?
All the time. I mean, on any project, like you build a prototype and then and you see how it works. At IDEO, the philosophy is think to build. So you think of something and then build it, but then also build to think. So you build something, you try to build a product or something, and then while doing it, you have a completely different idea. And that's why prototyping is so important, because you might not even go as far as testing it with the user. You in the process of prototyping, you make things real. And while making things real, you realize, okay, like the original idea that I had is not really working that well, because you just see that things don't, like, gravity works differently, or on a service people just wouldn't know how to use it because you don't know how to use it, and so you and so the process itself is important, and so prototyping can be anything. I think I'm working on a lot of confidential projects, but I can give one example where we were designing a fitness device, and we didn't have any brief, and it was just design a fitness device for abs, and anything is like that's a really wide brief, right? And so we went to Home Depot, which is the local hardware store here, and tried to buy some stuff to prototype. And while going through the aisles, because we didn't know what we wanted to prototype, we picked up stuff and realized, oh, this could be actually an exercise, like an abs device, you know. And then we started walking through the aisles, through every single aisle, and used things from the shelf to prototype an exercise. So we made 68 prototype videos at Home Depot, trying out just different, you know, with like a hammer. What can you prototype with a hammer? Like with all weird things, objects, and that was really insightful, because in 2 hours walking through Home Depot, we had prototyped 68 exercises, and none of them made it to the final, but all of them really influenced our final design. And this is like another example where prototyping is so important. You can talk about things, but when you try things out, it's just, you know, immediately if it's good or bad.
So it sounds like what you're describing is what we call rapid prototyping, where you're comfortable with just in the moment grabbing what you have available, putting it together, and just going visual and helping other people understand what you're talking about, even if it doesn't necessarily represent the final piece. Luisa, do you want to talk a little bit about examples that we've seen where someone does a great rapid prototype versus the final piece prototype that in the field, like the difference between a rapid prototype and what many people understand the term prototype to be?
You mean the difference between like a first rapid prototyping and something you do later on? Yeah,
I think a lot of people, when they hear the word prototype, they think of this, you know, final 3D printed element that might look exactly like it goes on the shelf. And so what we talk to our community about rapid prototyping.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite examples is for the first Amplify challenge, for the Women's Safety Challenge. There was this idea by Mathieu from France about creating women traveling together. It was called Women's Pool. And he partnered with this girl from Turkey, and she tried it out, and basically they were in Istanbul, and they were like, well, the first thing we need to do is mark where there's a space for women to meet, and they basically just took tape and marked a spot and wrote out, this is a place for women to meet, to travel and commute together. And the first thing that they learned, which was really interesting, is Istanbul was during protests back then. And actually that called attention to them. And the police came and they were kind of harassed. So just what they thought was going to be a safer place for them to meet actually called attention to them in a way that made it a bit unsafe for them. And then once they actually, and the whole idea was that traveling together would be safer, right? So they get on the bus and they start traveling. And they also realized that by being in the group, they relaxed. So paid less attention to where they had to get off and like who was around them, and then actually missed the stop and end up getting out in a place that wasn't properly lit. So it's just about getting out there. The resources you need don't have to be very much. Or I wonder, even just going to Home Depot, like maybe you didn't even have to buy some of those materials that you have. It's about experiencing and being with your user and learning from what you're doing. And again, going without judgment, understanding that you should have a question as opposed to an end statement. You want to go out and find something about the service or product that you're developing. be really open-minded. Also probably have a partner or two, so someone who is trying out the prototype and someone who is writing down and someone who is just observing, and then go and debrief and discuss what have you learned after trying this out. It could take 5 minutes, it could take
So I just want to let everyone know who's listening that there is a group chat dialogue box on the right-hand side, and you're welcome to ask questions as we go, and we'll kind of pop into this and try to answer your questions as we go along. Later on, we'll be inviting 2 of our community members in to ask their questions to our designers, but please feel free to actively participate using this chat box. We're keeping our eye on it, and we're answering your questions as we go. So I think that these examples are really, it's a great transition to a question that a lot of people have been having with the Refugee Education Challenge, where we're asking how we might provide education for people who've been displaced by conflict. The hard thing about this for a lot of people is they don't necessarily have access to refugees to test their ideas and test their assumptions, or perhaps they are in areas that have been displaced by conflict and they don't have access to the resources necessary to build out this idea. So I'd be really interested in hearing, Jorg, if you could give an example of a time when you did not have access to the resources or the end users that you needed to successfully ask questions and test your assumptions.
Not having access to the resources. I mean, I did a project in Mozambique, and we had to on the fly, we did our research, and then we realized it was a stove project, and we realized, okay, we had to go, before we leave back to San Francisco to prototype stuff or to do the design, we have to answer some fundamental questions for a new design, because we can't just go back and forth between San Francisco and Mozambique. And so we had to build stoves, that we had to build like work with different, like get some ideas out. So we used cardboard boxes. We found big cardboard boxes. In the hardware store we bought like scalpels, and then we just out of old, like these corrugated cardboard boxes, we built beautiful stoves that were actually, they looked quite cool, but they didn't have to look that cool. But they had like some basic functionality. You could take things in and out. We want to test the size, and that corrugated cardboard would totally answer all the questions that we had to. And we just spent one evening building them. Next day we brought them out on observations, and we answered all the questions we had to.
Awesome, thank you. Luisa, I'd love to hear a story of yours. I know that you have spent a bit of time in the field specifically for our Amplify program.
Yeah, actually that question came up. We ran recently a workshop in Kampala in Uganda with different organizations on the Refugee Education Challenge. And the first thing is to think, who are people around you who are facing similar situations as refugees. So if you're in an urban area or a rural area, think about our research phase and some of the challenges that were mentioned about people living in refugee camps or even as urban refugees. So there is think about people who go to school and there are too many students per teacher, or the infrastructure is really poor, or there is even no infrastructure at all. Think of any migrants who are coming to a new place, who are either dealing with a new language, with different culture, with just the fact of coming to a new city. So just trying to think, are there people around you who are facing similar challenges to refugees, and go prototype with them and learn from them is what we call, and trying to find analog users. And another thing to just realize is that even if you don't know, there might be refugees around you. So refugees are not only at refugee camps, and the term refugee is a little bit loose, right? So, for example, I come from Colombia, And in the city, we have a lot of migrants coming from the rural areas because of our civil war. And they have a different term. UNHCR describes them differently, but they are facing very similar challenges. So thinking around that, and you can always find people to prototype with, and thinking what are the similarities relevant to our challenge.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that story. That's really awesome. I would like to just go into a little bit the difference between prototyping when you're dealing with products versus service versus experiences. I think that there are lots of different ways to test those things out. And here at IDEO, we like to use role play and scripts, and we like to, do rapid brainstorms, and sometimes we just throw materials together. Jorg, would you like to give us an example of how we might go about prototyping and the differences across those?
Yeah, I mean, prototyping products is pretty straightforward because you just go what people will use later. But even with prototyping, even products products go beyond just the product. It's like the product experience. So it's always important to give it some context. So you can't just like design a product and give it to users out of context. So the best way is to give it in context. So one example was like we designed toilet paper, moist toilet paper, which is not very common in the US, and very like a taboo theme. Like, I mean, who wants to talk about toilet paper? And so we just designed like rapidly like a few boxes and left it with people at their home. So they could try it for a week, and that's already designing an experience, because we asked them to attach it on the wall, to put it in different places, and that's already an experience. With like prototyping services, it's a little bit more challenging to get tangible. So the first rapid prototype that we do is sketching out scenarios. Like, okay, like what instead of just talking about it or writing, like you make some sketch and say, okay, this person, like here's the journey. I'm trying to think of an example that I did. I'm working more on the product side. I can't think of examples, but like the sketching it out and showing it. This is also works for products. If you can't give it to people's homes, you show them, okay, here's this use scenario. This is a service, or this is a product, or this is like whatever experience you wanna convey, or you act it out, or you make a short movie, very simple movie. Trying to think of an example. Luisa, maybe you have an example.
So think around, it's not quite a service, but for our last Amplify challenge for 0 to 5, we were actually trying to engage users with no access to the internet to participate in Amplify challenges. And basically what they had to do is they had to call into a number, and they will listen to a short skit on a topic related to the challenge, and then they would be they will be asked some questions. And we had a partner. We worked in India and in Tanzania, and in India we had a partner. And this is a prototype a little bit more on a later stage. So the project was already going. We had the skit, and the line was up, and people could call in. But when we got to India, in a very, very rural area, we realized that our potential users didn't know about this service, so they weren't calling. So also to think about kind of the universe around the service. Like, you can have the service, and our partner had prototyped it, having people like listen to the skit and respond to it. But when we tried to scale it, people didn't know about it. And something we just did really on the fly. This was like at midnight in the middle of nowhere. We got pen and paper and worked with our translator to make very simple flyers. to advertise the product. Then we realized that some of our potential users wouldn't be able to read. So then we thought of a second iteration of how to make them visual, having the number really big, so that some people would be able to call. So it could be as easy as just making a pamphlet to promote your service, to understand the universe of how does your user hear about the service, and to be able to get to it.
Awesome. We have a question. It looks like there are some broadcast issues, and I apologize to anyone that is having some trouble. We are taking questions live. Carlos has asked, how can we validate our prototype with the needs of the community fast enough? So I think he's asking, you know, how can we get rapid feedback from the community to, you know, validate these assumptions that we have? Or do you want to take that one?
I mean, it's for doing like what we call the qualitative research is like talking to a few people. You know, you present the prototype to just a few people, maybe who really either represent the some people who represent the sort of like the community, and then some what we call the extreme users. Like at both ends of the spectrum, where you say, okay, here's a very like a person with disability that might use the service, and here's a person who's like a super pro expert that does these things all the time. Like then you get both ends of the spectrum, and then you can very early on, you can make a judgment on what works and what doesn't. You don't have to talk to that many people. On many projects, we just talk to like 6 to 10 people, and you'll know a ton more than before.
And then later on, you talk to people as you go through the process. So you talk to 6 to 10 people for this first question, and then you learn from that feedback, and you continue iterating over and over.
Exactly. I mean, the iteration, that's the key. Like you don't spend too much time on just one iteration. You rapidly test it with a few people, or get feedback. Like testing is the wrong word. Get feedback on your prototype with a few people. You go back, you iterate. You don't take the feedback too literally always. Like think about what people really mean. And get inspired by their feedback. Don't really take it too literal. That is also a little bit dangerous. But think behind it what the issue might be, and then do another iterations and get feedback from other people. Also, just a few number, and it's always a back and forth. If you have access to the people. Like rapid iteration is the fastest way to move forward and sort of validate your idea.
Awesome. We are inviting a couple Amplify community members into the chat to ask their questions. Looks like there are some connectivity issues where you know, it's not working really well for them to get in. So if we can't get them online, I do have their questions. We will ask them for them. In the meantime, feel free to add your questions to the dialog box. Apologies for the delay while we work this out. While I kind of fiddle with the technicalities here, I would love to hear another example of your prototyping experience, maybe your favorite, what is your favorite prototype hack that you put together? We'll start with York.
My favorite hack is, so I'll show you. Can people see me, in fact? I don't know.
Yeah. So
I worked on this chair here. I don't know if you see it. It's a student chair with the tablet, and and it's the type of stuff I like. I like prototyping, and the first prototype, or the way it led to this design, was an IKEA. It was like I think the cheapest IKEA office chair, which is like around $18. We used the shell, and we mounted it onto a box that was like literally a square box with an opening, and we wanted to prototype. Okay, we knew people in high-density classrooms, they have to put their bags somewhere, so we said, okay, let's put the bags in the box. So put the bags underneath just a square box, and then people want to swivel maybe, so we had this swivel thing from IKEA on top, and then we had like little like side shelf because the box was larger than the seat, and people could put stuff in there, and then we mounted somehow a table, and the easiest way to mount the table was in the middle of the so it could also swivel, and that prototype really led to the final design, and was so easy to understand for people, and so that's kind of my favorite prototype.
I love that story because we actually have those chairs here in the office, and I sit on one. Oh, here's Simon. I sit on one pretty regularly, so it's pretty cool to hear the story of how that came about. Simon, how are you doing? Can you hear us?
Thank you.
Hi, wonderful. Thank you for joining us. So we have a couple minutes for you to ask your burning prototype question, but our designers are not necessarily familiar with your idea, so if you could take a minute to describe it briefly and what you're struggling with, and then ask your question, and here we go.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to do a screen share just so you can see a couple of images. So just bear with me 1 second. Okay, can you see that image there?
Yep. Oh.
Oh. Wait
there you
1
go.
second.
Kind of a strange, endless screen loop there.
Yeah, that's bear with me. Okay, can you see that now?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so the project we're looking at is based on some work that we're currently doing in Kakuma refugee camp. This is a picture of believe it or not, this has got 1,000 pupils in it. Average teacher-to-pupil ratio is between one teacher to 150 to 200 children. There's very little to no resources there, and therefore any type of teaching is quite difficult, to say the least. So what we're currently doing at this the school is we were doing some teacher training, some psychosocial work, and looking at classroom construction. And this image you see here is of the Mabat style of classroom. So it's the corrugated iron with the metal and wooden frame. And as you can see from this picture, there's pretty much the only resource in there is a chalkboard at that end. And at around the sides and at the far end, there's nothing there basically. So this is pretty much the same and throughout the classrooms. This one highlights where there's not even desks and chairs in this one. And this is also the same for the mud brick schools and also the tented schools, where you have very, very little resources in there. So just very briefly, we were doing some work with the teachers over there, looking at some sort of like prototyping stuff, very basic prototyping of how we can use resources in the classroom. And also to work with them on sort of doing some very initial type of stuff, looking to use this rear wall where it's a big, vast space, so it would be interesting to see what we can do with it. So the things that we talked about is how we could put some information on there, so things about numericals and shapes, and could be the solar system, things like that. And if you can teach those individually, but the clever thing is how can you then bring those different items together to teach a completely different subject. So we did a bit of work with the children as well on some really basic idea stuff. And then we've actually brought this to some of our work that we do in the UK, which we work with schools around looking at refugees, how they become refugee, and what it's like to go to school in a refugee camp. So we've been getting the pupils there to come up with different ideas of what could go onto these walls. And they've been coming along with pictures like this, and effectively showing the rear wall of the classroom and what we could do on it. So this is the wall that we're looking to basically use throughout all the different classrooms. Again, it's similar in a mud brick one and also in a tented one where we would use material to do it. What we're looking at is to get the designs and use some of the similar type of work that you do in graffiti and stenciling, is to put a huge big resource wall up on the top here. So where we're at with this project is we've been doing the content design with UK school kids and getting some information also from teachers and pupils in Kakuma refugee camp. We're about to start to look at the actual layout design of how to actually bring these different individual items together. And then we're going to be moving forward from there through the stencil design, selecting materials, creating a proper prototype. At the minute we're doing paper-based ones, just do some rapid prototyping like you mentioned earlier. And then we're looking to take that further on if possible. So what we've been doing is looking to see how we can work with the community champions that you have in there in Kakuma. And so what we've been doing is working with them to see how we can basically get their ideas and for them in the community. So what I'd like to know really is what type of things that the community champions help us with regards prototyping and such like. Can I pass that back to you?
Yes, so thank you. So for those of you who don't know, we have something called community champions, where there are awesome community members who have decided to step up into a leadership space, whether it's sharing the skills that they have for ideas that are on the platform, or collaborating in ways that these other ideas may not have been able to do. We also have in-country managers on the ground in a lot of different priority countries, specifically for this challenge, people who are helping us facilitate conversations with people who've been displaced by conflict. So I think what Simon is asking is, how can we leverage these opportunities? Sounds like you guys have a wonderful access to end users, but we also have these community members who are excited to be ambassadors and champions of this question. So I think Luisa is a great person to answer this question, being how can we leverage this relationship to get rapid feedback, specifically for Simon or perhaps for someone who doesn't have access to end users on the ground?
Yeah, so the community champions are for refugees living at the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. Their main role has been to get ideas from the community, but I think it's been amazing, Simon, to see your conversation on the challenge, knowing that you want to develop ideas in Kakuma and they're there. And I think you should establish a relationship with them, which you have reached out to them. It's important to understand, as you might know, that Kakuma is divided in different zones, and most of the champions live in zone 1 and 2, and zone 3 and 4 is a little bit more relegated, so it's where newer refugees are coming in and resources are not as plentiful over there. So just reaching out to them on their profiles, we can share a link with everyone where other people can also reach out to them. They don't have materials, so just consider their situation, and if you want to provide them with specific materials, that is fine, and it's up to you and what you agree upon. But they would be a great resource to just do some qualitative research. Have you been to Kakuma, Simon?
Yes, we've got 3 projects ongoing there. And the school where we were doing a lot of our testing for this project was in Kakuma 4, so in the new arrivals area, mostly South Sudanese refugees. But we've also got our construction side of stuff where we're looking at how to adapt these walls is actually in Kakuma 1. So we're right across the campus, basically.
And I think a lot of what we've learned also establishing the champion program, and because a lot of what they've had to do is community organizing, is understand the community dynamics within Kakuma. So it's something I've learned a lot during the past 3 months. And one thing is what Jörg has talked a lot about is like product prototyping, but also understanding that if you're not part of the community, and Simon, you're already working there, so maybe I'm even curious to learn about how did you get to Kakuma and how did you establish those projects there, because it might be interesting to other people participating in the challenge, but also for starting an idea like this, like who are the people that you need to get involved. So a lot of what we've done with the community champion program is that get buy-in into the community, right? So the people we have selected are leaders within their community, and know other leaders. So when we organize workshops, they bring people in, and that means that for you, Simon, for example, as you're trying to learn from the community, they can help you get insights from different key influencers within the community. So teachers, block leaders, mothers who have influence in other mothers. So I think that's a great into understanding community dynamics and how to get people to actually participate in your idea.
Awesome. Simon, thank you for asking your question. I'm sorry to cut it off here. Your idea is really interesting, and we'd love to keep chatting about it. But we have a lot of really exciting questions that have been coming through on the chat board, and I'd like to do a rapid response answer session here. We have 5 minutes left in this chat. Let's see if we can get through 3 or 4 of the questions. So, Jörg, let's have you answer this first one. It came from Keiko, who was unable to log in, unfortunately, but she did have some really interesting questions around participatory designing and focusing your prototype tasks when you have many questions that you're trying to answer. So, go.
For me, my experience, participatory design is great, but it is more to a way to answer many questions. It doesn't lead to the final design, in my experience, but it is you give people tools to express really what they're thinking in a different way than you could when you ask them. So you give you let people design and then collect and try to understand what's behind what they designed, and then you take it back from them and design it, make a prototype and show it, and that leads to the final design.
So what happens if you have a lot of questions that you're trying to answer? How do you narrow down what you prototype in that moment? Because, you know, for our users, you don't necessarily have to answer all your questions in one prototype.
Yeah, so it's especially at the beginning, it's important to split questions up, to build like lots of prototypes to answer individual questions. So you don't put everything into one prototype, because that often, like, people get hung up into one detail. So you try to say, okay, we're testing this with this prototype and this other element with the other prototype. Later on, it'll all live together. But at the beginning, to get feedback, just split things up and say, okay, here this, and this. And if you don't have time to test everything, then you just say, like, okay, let's test a certain aspect, and then include it in the next round of prototypes where you test something else.
That's great. Gretchen's asking, what does prototyping success look like?
Prototyping success looks like that there's either a big failure or where people that's usually the easiest. Like, people like absolutely hate it, and you're like, okay, this is I answered my question, or you come. For me, it's like I look at the prototype and I think it's great, and when I think it's great, it usually is. But usually after I build it, I sometimes think it's bad, or you kind of I think after you prototype whether it's whether it's really bad or whether it might work. And then if people react positively or positively to it, you know it's probably good.
Thank you. M is asking, how early in the process should we be thinking about prototyping? Who is that?
As early as possible. I think we encourage people to use the user experience map, and it's think about your user again, of the whole system. How do people hear about it? How do they get to it? What happens after they walk away? If you're just thinking about to bring Simon's idea just because it's fresh in our minds, if you're thinking just about what is on the wall and you think about that for a month, you might miss a lot of learning, of understanding the whole experience from the beginning, and then try to get a person in front of it and just get a reaction.
Yeah, here on OpenIDEO and through the Amplify program, we believe that earlier equals better. So the earlier your idea gets on the platform, the more feedback it can get. The earlier you start to test those assumptions and ask those big questions, the quicker you can learn from the success and failure and iterate and try again. So we like early prototyping. One last question, and then we'll kind of close out. Aline is asking about the challenges of working in a multidisciplinary team, specifically when we don't have designers to champion prototyping. So she's asking what techniques we might be able to use to start this culture. And I think, Georg, you'd be a great person to answer this because you often step into client scenarios where they're not used to a prototyping culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, multidisciplinary teams, first of all, you need to be, people need to be open, they need to be good in their discipline, but they really need to be open to the other disciplines. That's really important. But the beauty of prototyping is, people will have different opinions no matter what on what might be a good design and what not. And if you say, let's try it out, prototyping is making things tangible. That basically equals, prototyping equals making things tangible. And if there's if people have different opinions on what should be done, just do it both, and then you'll find out. There's often, in my experience in teams, if there's an argument about what's a good idea or what a bad idea is, we'll just say, okay, let's just find an easy way to test it with consumers, to prototype it, and that's the most straightforward thing.
That's great. I love that. Thank you. Okay. Well, we are out of time, but we are always excited to have these types of conversations, so feel free to continue to add questions to the dialog box and we'll pop back in and see what we can do. Please share this with your friends, and please participate in the Amplify Challenge. We love people from all disciplines to join the conversation, whether you have an idea or you want to provide feedback to an idea already on there. It's the collaborative nature that really makes this a powerful process. So thank you so much to our designers for being a part of the conversation. Thank you to everyone who tuned in, and see you on OpenIDEO.
Okay.